Well, welcome everybody to the Public Works and Finance Committee meeting of January 22nd. My right is Walter Steed, council member. I'm Wayne Krause. Sitting in for Art Betke is John Weber, and sitting in for Gary Reedner, our city supervisor, who's on the way to Boise for meetings, is Bill Belknap. His first order of business is the approval of the January 12th minutes.
They look good to me.
And they look good to me, so they are considered passed. Next item is 122 West E Street Lot Division. Becky Couch is presenting.
Did you get an answer to your quitclaim deed question?
Yeah, because Gary's gone. So.
He was in the office this morning.
Yeah, yes and no.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hi, Becky.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, so before you today is a lot division for an existing parcel located at 122 West E Street. The parcel is located north of E Street between North Almond Street and North Main, outlined here in red. The parcel is located within the motor business zoning district, as well as all adjacent parcels with some nearby multifamily residential R4 zones to the east and the west. Within the motor business zoning district, there is no specified minimum lot width or minimum lot area for commercial uses. And here is the proposed lot division. The existing parcel is approximately 124,965 square feet, and the proposal is to create two parcels, one at approximately 73,133 square feet and one at approximately 51,832 square feet. Per City of Moscow requirements for lot divisions, the property owners within 600 feet have been notified, and the site was posted 7 days before today's meeting. And staff's recommendation is to take public comment and approve the lot division request, recommend approval, of the lot division request with no conditions suggested.
Okay, short and sweet, right? Mm-hmm. Anybody have any questions for Becky?
Nope.
Becky, I have one, whether you can answer it or we can talk, maybe Bill knows, maybe nobody knows. In our packet, one was a quit claim deed from the City of Moscow back in the late 70s to General Telephone, and then the other one was a warranty deed from the owners of the property to General Telephone. And not included in the packet, there was the execution document, but the actual quitclaim deed was not included in our packet. I had Stephanie pull it up and looked at it, and of course it's got all the surveyor's information and so on and so forth in it. The curiosity that I had was, what property did the City of Moscow own that they gave to General Telephone? Do you know that?
I do not know the answer.
Was it just right of way? I think I know somebody that does. So if there's no other questions, then to start off with, we're going to kind of have a public comment period. So we'll start off with Ms. Bennett, and give your name and your address. And
Shelley Bennett, 213 South Main Street in Moscow. And the City of Moscow's interest that they gave away was the alley that ran through the middle of the property, from my understanding.
Yeah. Stephanie said she thought it was probably just a right-of-way.
Yeah, I'm sure it was the alley that runs right through.
We just vacated the right-of-way on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was and there probably still is a gate on the fence on the north side of the property, and that's where that alleyway was.
It's still there, and this lot division is purposely to the west of that alley so that they can maintain their interest. The gates will stay, and the fence will move. The fence that's on the west side of the property will move over to this new proposed lot division.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the Idaho Ice, who will be the buyer of the property, Mr. Schwartz, who's here, his purpose in purchasing this property was primarily because his trucks have to go out off of Morton onto Highway 95, and it's very dangerous for them. There's a place for him to be able to, there's an access off of E Street, and they'll have to develop an access off of Morton. to be able to drive through.
Okay. Any questions for Shelley?
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley.
Any other folks that would like to comment on this while have this in the open comment period? Okay. Well, hearing none. Walter?
I'm kind of in the why not mode.
I am too. John?
Seems reasonable to me.
Well, makes sense to me, so we'll just recommend approval on this, and I think we can move this forward on the consent agenda and just make it happen. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy.
Yeah, the
Next item is the wastewater treatment plant, the slide gates replacement project. This has to do with bid results and a contract award, and Scott Bontrager. I mixed that one up. Can't speak today. Hi, Scott. How you doing?
Good. So presented before you is the next wastewater treatment plant slide gate replacement project, similar to what we had done last year. This one is replacing 4 gates at the chlorine contact chambers at the wastewater treatment plant. So this,
Where was the other one, Scott?
the other one was in the
phosphorus.
effluent chambers? Aeration basin.
Okay, thank you.
So this one was solicited to 4 contractors back in early January, January 2nd, and we received 3 bids back on this one, of which the bids ranged anywhere from $15,153 all the way up to $39,353. And all the bids have been looked over and everything verified for what had actually been bid on it. And the low bidder for this one is Williams Brothers Construction with a bid of $15,153. Everything else that I have seen so far is checked out, and Williams Brothers Construction has done work out at the wastewater treatment plant before, and they've done work that was considered good work out there, so staff recommends acceptance of the low bid to Williams Brothers Construction.
Okay. John?
Not that it makes a whole lot of difference, Scott, but did you have any, or were you told or figured out any reason that there was essentially between $15,000 and $40,000 difference in bid price? Was somebody else just really busy and
Yeah, of what we've heard, TML Construction has another big project they're working on, kind of just received a courtesy bid from them. And SNL Underground, we typically receive bids on for our sewer projects and for wastewater treatment projects, but they always seem to be bidding pretty high on stuff, so
Okay.
I don't know if they have a lot of work somewhere else.
Tell Shim to get sharper pencil.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Do you remember, was the previous project 4 gates, and do you remember what it went for?
The previous project was 5 gates, and it went for around $27,000.
But you're confident that this low bid is doable?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I've got.
Why are we paying sales tax? Why does the city have to pay sales tax?
State law. You have to pay sales tax on supplies.
Mm-hmm.
And we bought the gates, and they're in our possession, so when they're installed, we owe the sales tax. We're putting it through to the contractor.
I
Yes.
thought the city was tax exempt from things like that. Apparently not.
When the actual material is installed by a separate contractor, we're no longer tax exempt. The contractor
Really?
has to pay the tax.
If we were to install it, then we wouldn't pay the tax.
No.
Okay.
Good catch.
Guess we're good to go with this one then, right?
yeah?
Put that on the consent agenda.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay. Next one, Idaho Gem Grant. And this is infrastructure improvements and a reimbursement request. And looks like we're going to have Wes McDonald sit in for Elisa.
Yes, Elisa sends her apologies. She's feeling a bit under the weather today, so asked that I take her place. So I will endeavor to do so. There's really kind of 2 parts to the item today, and Elisa's portion has to do with the Idaho Gym Grant and wrapping up that process. And if you'll recall, we received a gym grant to allow for installation of fiber optic systems and some street frontage improvements in what is now we're calling the EMSI building, which is the old Daily News building owned by Mark Wentz. And so that project has proceeded. The fiber system was installed, and then the street improvements were kind of wrapped into a little bit larger project the city participated in to make those street improvements on Jackson in front of EMSI and also in front of Salvation Army. And all of that work is done with the exception of installation of some tree grates. It's still pending, but those will be in soon. So, from the grant side of it, the package that Elisa put together includes this request for reimbursement form that's in your packet today. This is an item that needs to be signed by the mayor before it can be sent off to have the city reimbursed for the $50,000 portion of the grant that we're processing. And that is what she is requesting of the commission and the council, is authorization for the mayor to sign that. Along with that, I have a short slide show that I can show you the improvements that were done on the street side of the MSI and Salvation Army frontage, some before and after, and then a little quick breakdown of what the cost turned out to be for the street improvements portion.
Okay.
So if we recall, this is on Jackson Street looking to the south, and Salvation Army here on the right, and then what was the Daily News building continuing on to the south as we're looking south here, and 3 lanes, and then this parking lane along this west side of the street. There were some improvements that have been made in the past, some of the wheelchair ramps, but you can also see where in an area like this where it's very narrow between what were significantly large trees for street trees and the existing building and the property lines, it created problems for access. It created problems for heaving of sidewalks, things of this nature that we saw throughout this corridor. And so the improvement was meant to address that type of situation, to replace the trees that were there that were really of the wrong size and character for the location. To expand the width of the sidewalk to make it a bit more pedestrian-friendly, and to install some of the vintage-style LED lights that we're using in the downtown core. So what you see here is first of a series of shots showing how the building looks today with the new remodel for EMSI and the new sidewalk in place. You can see some of the vintage-style lighting, the new trees working along that section. It's obviously much more open than it used to be, and these were shot just last week, so it's wintertime, no leaves on the trees, so that makes it even look a little more bare, perhaps, than we're used to, but those will fill in over time, and the trees are such that they're species that are going to be a better fit for the location, and I think they will work well. The improvements did include the frontage of Salvation Army, as well as the MSI. And if we start at the north end of Salvation Army's business here, you can see the old section of the sidewalk, what it was like at this location, and then as we've removed the parking and extended the curb line out, the new width that we constructed here and would like to see constructed eventually all the way along this stretch of Jackson between 3rd and 6th Street. New street lights and the new trees in there. So just working our way down the street a little bit, get an idea what those look like. It's turned out really well. I think people have been happy with it. It certainly makes a much more pleasant pedestrian route, better sidewalks, wider sidewalks. You're a bit removed from where vehicles are located by the extended walk on out towards the new curb line location. So hopefully you've all had a chance to see this and take a look at it out in the field. I think it's turned out well, and we'd like to see more of it as we go along. Here's one of the tree grates, and maybe they are all in now, that has the artistic components that were developed as part of the College Street project, so that's what all the tree grates around here will look like on this particular job. And then just a last image of one of the full cutoff LED vintage-style streetlights that we're now using in the downtown core. It includes the arms for the banners that will go in here in time, outlets at the tops for Christmas lighting, things of that nature, holiday lighting, similar to what we've done in Friendship Square. So, as far as the overall cost of the road improvements, when we started this back in the late summer, these numbers were the ones that were presented based on the estimates of the work and quotes that we'd received through Mark Wentz and his contractor, numbers that we had from some of our work in the past, and how we'd identified funding sources. And so the GEM grant, of course, was in there for a road portion of about $32,000. Some of our city funds under pavement management, sidewalk program, streetlight program, and arts program, and then some direct labor by our street crews and demo of some sidewalk. And then the contribution or participation by Mr. Wentz and by EMSI for the estimated total project cost of $109,770. Now, when we look at actual costs, you can see here on the bottom line that we came in a fair bit below that, which is encouraging, always good news for everybody. And so we have maintained the full payment and actually gained just a little bit more on the grant portion. But when the fiber got closed out, what was left, it contributed just a touch more here to the road section, and then have redistributed and essentially lowered the contributions then from all the remaining parties down to this new $84,757 number. And I should mention again that these last two are subject to a URA, public infrastructure reimbursement agreement between Mr. Wentz and the URA for some reimbursement over time. So there's the kind of the quick version. As far as any actions at this point, the one action would be per Elisa's request to, I believe she said, to carry this forward to council. Where is it? There it is. With the recommendation to execute the reimbursement agreement for the $50,000 on the GEM grant.
Walter?
Thank you, Wayne. A couple of three questions. The project wasn't cut in half, but the contributions through the URA were cut in half approximately, if you put that slide back up. How was that done?
The contributions had a reduction of about 38 to 40%. Essentially, when we laid out...
Some of the earlier items were specific items that the cost would be the cost.
Right, and items that were specific to the frontage of EMSI that the grant could cover, we put under the grant. Other items that were related to the other frontage of Salvation Army, we put typically in the street line items, if you will. It's where the street lighting is kind of where it shifted around a little bit. You know, part of what you get into is, you know, what's eligible under which line item and where do you expend and all those things. The other thing to keep in mind is in the early ones, we had a little bit heavier contingency in the line items for Wentz and EMSI, with the idea that if those costs went higher, that they would be on the hook for that, but they then saw a greater benefit of that reduction in cost. Yeah. So that's how we got to there. I did review these numbers with Mr. Wentz. He seemed comfortable with them last week, and yeah, that's where we are.
Okay, good. Probably for Bill, and I don't expect you to know an answer, but you can probably look it up. I asked Gary this over the last Friday and never got an answer. The fiber work was tested in November of 13. I'm not sure when it was put into use, but that would tell me that the work was complete in November of 13. Why are we just now asking for reimbursement from the grant?
I think that we just finally got the final numbers from Mark to document to provide the request to the Department of Commerce at this point.
Well, I believe, yeah, she's doing it in one request rather than staged requests. I'm not sure why, but that's the package that we have.
It leaves the city out $17,000 for a year, and
we didn't fund that. That was funded by Mr. Wentz.
Okay, so he's the one that's out.
Yes.
I'm not as concerned. Okay.
He's the one who carried that.
And then my final thing, if I may, I can't ever remember a city council being asked to approve a mayor's request for a fund request, a mayor's signature for a fund request.
Yeah,
I've asked Gary also, but hadn't gotten an answer.
And I don't think I have a response for you either. If the council had approved of the grant application and the project
approved the project, approved everything else to do with it, this is just getting the money.
I think it's because it usually comes to admin committee and not public works and finance. Because I can remember approving them.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah, maybe it's been done differently on a case-by-case basis, depending upon the nature of the project.
That may be the answer.
Yeah. Anyway,
I'm good with it.
I just have one question, and it's kind of not even really on point, but the trees that were put back in are not going to get this big?
Correct.
They're only going to get about that big?
Yeah, much more reasonably sized street
Okay.
trees, yes. Yeah, more of a columnar style also,
Okay.
more vertical rather than the large
Yeah.
outgrowth. Keep them off the building, essentially.
Well, the committee will recommend approval.
Go to consent, I presume. A question for Les. What's the status on working with ITD to extend this feature on down to the south?
Yeah, there has been a traffic analysis completed, and it is being, it's in the process, I think, of getting carried to ITD. It's out of Gary's office, with the idea that they had indicated a willingness to reconsider previous positions on
They
the
originally denied it.
Jimmy John's frontage, right, if it could be demonstrated that there would not be any significant impact or change in traffic safety and volume at that intersection. And we believe the study provides that information, so we'll see what kind of response they give us. There have been further discussions about other sections of the corridor between 3rd and 6th Street, and they have met with less than favorable responses. So we're going to be working on a little bit bigger package to kind of develop a drawing of what the entire section would look like, maybe from 3rd to College, as perhaps we would envision it with these types of improvements, with the idea of taking to them kind of what is it all going to look like in our minds, what we'd like to achieve, so it's not quite so piecemeal for them, and perhaps they would be more inclined to be receptive to that.
As a person that, like everyone here, that drives down there, if there's a chip truck in the far right lane now, you don't duck into that spot and turn.
No, it's a little tight.
It's,
So that
you
turn
know,
pocket,
so
right.
as far as actually changing or increasing any sort of vehicular or pedestrian risk, I don't think but I'm not with the ITD either, so.
Well, we pretty much reached the same conclusion. It's a substandard turning lane, and it's not fully used the way the way that it should be, frankly, because of that size. And so, yeah, it's not a great benefit, we don't believe, in having that turn lane there.
Yeah.
I think that turn lane was always, actually, as an afterthought, it was because it was parking that went
Parking.
further up, and then it was like, well, it's just...
It's a vacant lot, we don't need the parking, let's make it a turn lane.
Yeah, right, whatever. How many parking spaces did we lose? 6?
I believe about 6, yeah, about that.
You know, I thought it's interesting to note is last 2 or 3 times when I've driven down Jackson during the daytime, I've watched to see, and even with those 6 gone, there's still 2 or 3 parking spaces along Jackson that are not being utilized, generally a little further down, but, so.
And usually a large number in the lot
South Jackson
Yeah.
lot.
that
There's-
are unused, so.
I've never been able to not park in the Jackson Street parking lot. It's always been, the other day I went there, and I had to drive around 2 bays before somebody pulled out, but I did get a spot, so it worked. Okay, well, we'll recommend approval, put that on the consent agenda. And, Les, you've got a couple reports for us.
I do.
You got one on the pilot program, the wastewater treatment plant.
That is correct. We'll start with that one. As you will recall, in the summer of 2014, we conducted 2 pilot studies out at the wastewater treatment plant, and those were kind of follow-on efforts from the pre-design work that was done for Phase 5 improvements at the wastewater treatment plant. Phase 5 is intended to address the temperature requirements under our NPDES permit. And so out of that pre-design study, there was a recommendation to do some pilot testing at the plant to confirm some of the assumptions that were made during the pre-design efforts and to further educate us, I guess you will, on how the options could proceed for dealing with temperature on existing conditions for our effluent and our environment. So 2 pilot tests. The first of them was a cooling tower, which was intended to replicate the conditions that you might see in an evaporative cooling pond. So a pond that's going to hold water for an extended period, go through heating, cooling cycles with the course of the day, deep enough that you get cooler water at the bottom, warmer at the top, those types of things. A number of the alternatives identified in the study include that type of facility. So it's hard to replicate by just going out and building a pond. So you bring in this evaporative cooling tower that actually brings effluent from the plant and essentially just drops it through a distance of air with some fan systems blowing through. And to do that, you bring in this, it's a rental unit, which we brought in for about 35, 40 days in July and a little bit of August. So that was the first one. And then the second one was a test of the wetlands. In this case, we used the existing U of I state line wetlands that are just west of the plant to determine if those wetlands have a cooling capability. And there had been some previous work done with some WSU students and professor that seemed to indicate that, yes, there was some advantage to taking water through a wetland. It would tend to cool that water temperature. So we put together a program to take water out of Paradise Creek using a University of Idaho water right for irrigation and put that into the wetland facility, run it through one of the channels in the wetlands with a lot of monitoring going on, and then the return capability to bring water back to the plant if there was a need to do that. No water released to the creek. It was just kept, actually, as it turns out, kept on site in the wetlands and dealt with there. So that work was all completed this fall, and our consultants on the project, JEB Engineers, has developed a preliminary client draft review document. Have reviewed this. We actually met with them earlier today, right here in this room, went through the findings, started looking at some edits to this plan, potentially some recommendations on how to move forward. The thought today is I just wanted to kind of bring you up to speed on where we are. They're going to modify or make the edits to this draft and get it to a point that it's ready to then bring back to this group for a presentation on what the findings are of the study and recommendations on how we may move forward. Okay? So that's where we stand today.
Did we learn anything?
Yeah, we learned a number of things. I think there was definitely some confirmation of some of the assumptions within the study, so that they were, what really is the capability of a wetland in Moscow, Idaho, because you can't replicate that anywhere else. It's our own climate, our own soils, our own temperatures, our own plant growth. So we got a pretty good handle on how that works and the benefits there. And there is cooling in a wetland. I mean, we confirmed that hypothesis that had come from WSU. And have some idea of what that cooling can be. We also have some information, further information then on what the cooling capability is of an evaporative pond. And so at this point, it appears that the alternatives that were identified in the pre-design study as being viable remain viable based on what we're seeing in the study. So nothing yet that says, nope, this doesn't work, throw it out.
Okay.
So good steps, and we'll be bringing a report in more detail back to you in the not-too-distant future. Probably a month, I'm guessing.
Just a question. The water that was taken from the University of Idaho's
Water right?
Yes. That's already been treated, hadn't it?
That was creek water. We pulled it right out of Paradise Creek.
It was non-treated.
It was downstream of our discharge, so it did include our discharge.
So, all right.
And then it included the creek water that came through the city. It's just what's in the creek next to the wetlands, so that's what was pulled out.
It was not all treated wastewater.
No.
Pardon me?
It was not all treated wastewater.
Right, it was
Some treated and some natural.
Yeah, it's what's in the creek. It happened to be downstream of our
whatever
discharge.
happened to be in the creek.
Yeah, and all the other storm discharges all the way up the route.
Okay.
Seems, as I recall, the wetlands idea is less expensive to implement and maintain than a cooling tower. Is that correct?
Yeah, the cooling towers, just a cooling tower of the size we would need, yeah, they're fairly expensive, and they may not get you quite as much cooling as you need. So wetlands in the initial cost, I believe, was a little bit lower. Operationally, cooling towers, of course, require power. And so there's, long-term costs are probably higher on a cooling tower. Evaporative cooling ponds are a little different story. You've got upfront capital costs to, have land and do all the grading and construct the piping necessary, the pumping. Operationally, they're fairly inexpensive because it's just natural environment doing what it does. The wetlands are to some extent have that same condition. It's a natural environment doing what it does, but with wetlands, there is a certain amount of maintenance involved. I mean, are you going to remove vegetation so that it doesn't get too overgrown periodically? Do you occasionally need to go in and remove, build up on the bottom of the pond and revegetate it? Maintaining pumps, things of that nature. So they all have costs. But yeah, as I recall, the concepts of cooling towers were not as favorably viewed in terms of the functionality, if you will, as compared to cooling ponds, particularly with the relation to cost. And the wetlands have a lot of benefit, but there's some trade-offs because you have to deal with, okay, what happens to water quality? Yeah, you're dealing with temperature, great. What about other bacteria and phosphorus and nitrogen comes out of a natural environment? And do you have to take that back to the plant and retreat it and then let it go or not? And some reliability issues because you're relying upon weather conditions. If you have an extremely hot but very dry year, does it cool as well? If you have a very moist year, does it cool as well? I mean, you're a little more, you're subject to nature as compared to, say, for instance, a chiller, which is mechanical. You turn the switch, it works. You turn it off when you're done. Right.
You mentioned phosphates.
Phosphorus, yes.
We already are treating our discharge water for phosphates.
We are.
So when you talk about a problem with phosphates within a wetland area, I would assume this would be a natural buildup of phosphates.
Yes.
So then the question would be, since this is below our point of discharge, where we're discharging into the wetlands, why are we then responsible for the natural buildup of phosphates in a wetland area?
It all depends on how EPA views your point of discharge. And at this point, our point of discharge is into Paradise Creek. And if we go through a wetland facility that is part of our treatment train, then we're not discharging to the wetland, we're using the wetland, and the discharge is at the end of the wetland.
Well, that was my next question is, are we able to discharge all of our wastewater into the wetlands and contain it in there and through evaporation and percolation not have to let it run back off into Paradise Creek? No. So there's another point of discharge in.
No, the volumes are too great to do that. And the
wetlands goes back into it, and so if the phosphates are too high when it goes back in, then we're back in the same boat.
Back in the same boat. Okay. So, yeah, that's part of the challenge of a wetland.
Right.
And the concept with the wetlands that's in the pre-design study was to do an evaporative cooling pond with the wetland as additional added treatment to just get you that additional cooling that you need before it goes out. But there are complications with that. So.
I wonder if we give the University of Idaho some more irrigation water.
All for it.
All they want.
Yeah, I'm all for it. So anyway, this will be coming back in more detail with our consultants in a couple of meetings out.
Okay, let's see, what was the other one?
Downtown signage, the last one.
Downtown signage.
Yeah, and this will be very brief. If you'll recall, I brought before you in the past the final version of what the new downtown signs would look like for the historic district, replacing the old blue, we call them surfboards around here, surfboard signs. Those have been at the manufacturing facility since mid-October, and what they're telling us now is they're anticipating a completion date of the 18th of February. So, which is a lot longer than we'd anticipated and what we'd reported in the past based on our conversations. I think they had some complications with what all was in the final version of the design, but they've got that straightened out. And so they're in production, and we'll get them mid to late February. They'll go to our street crews, and then depending on weather conditions and workloads, they'll start installing those as time allows.
Do you remember how many there are?
Not offhand, I believe it's about 8 or 10, somewhere in that range. 8 or 10, somewhere right in there, thinking about. Essentially, every street that crosses the historic district boundary downtown will have one.
Okay. Don?
That's good. Thank you.
Nothing else.
More business before this committee, and we stand adjourned. Thank you.